Parashat Shoftim, the Judges. I want to dig deeper into this parsha and explore an important claim about moral society that is made in the parsha that I think is worth reflecting upon, especially this month. The claim is that as important as it is to do what is right and to not do what is wrong, it is more important to know the difference, to know what it means to do something that is wrong or to do something that is right, even if you can't always live up to those commitments. This theme is explored by a rabbi named Aryeh Leib Heller, who was an 18th century Galician rabbi. He's most famous for his major works and commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch, which is the code of Jewish law. He authored the Ketzot HaChoshen and the Avnei Miluim. If you're studying the Shulchan Aruch, which is the code of Jewish law, you really cannot study the work without referring to the Ketzot HaChoshen and the Avnei Miluim. They are there on the page as essential commentaries to the Shulchan Aruch. So he's a major 18th century rabbi, but when he was younger, he wrote a book that was less scientific and more philosophical, studied really in only the most elite yeshivas today, called the Shev Shmatata, or in yeshivish they call it the Shev Shmaita. It sounds like Shmata. It's a book that's, I believe, 7 volumes, 24 chapters each volume. I have only read the introduction, and even that required a tutor and careful concentration. It's a very complicated philosophical work, fascinating, discussing Jewish attitudes towards the world, and especially the topic of how to manage doubt in legal proceedings. In the introduction to his book, the Shev Shmatata, he asks a fascinating question, comparing 2 stories of evil cities in the Hebrew Bible, 2 stories that result in 2 different outcomes. The first story of an evil city is the more famous one, the city of Sodom. The story is told in the 19th chapter of the book of Genesis. If you remember it, 2 angels are sent to Sodom, and they are attacked by a mob for no reason at all. Some say they were raped. Abraham pleads for the city. God, will you spare the city if I can find 20 righteous people or 10 righteous people? Sodom is destroyed by sulfur and fire because nobody righteous could be found at all in this city. And the only one who ends up escaping is, you remember, Abraham's nephew Lot, and his wife turns around to see the city destroyed and turns into the pillars of salt, which you can go visit if you see that where the reputed city of Sodom used to be, near the Dead Sea in Israel. That's the story of Sodom. The less familiar story is from the book of Shoftim, the book of Judges. Judges 19, actually, the same chapter. In Hebrew, the story is called Pilegesh Bagiv'ah, the concubine in Gibeah. It's actually a very similar story, where you have travelers passing through the town of Gibeah, and a gang attacks them. There's a verse from that story that is almost exactly the same as the verse found in Genesis 19 in the city of Sodom. Gibeah, too, seems to be a town filled with misogyny and subjugation and rape and murder, and there's even dismemberment in the story. But unlike Sodom, which is completely destroyed, in Gibeah, Only those who committed the crime were punished, but the city itself was saved. This difference is what leads Heller to pose in his introduction: why was the city of Gibeah spared when they seemed to be guilty of the same sin that the residents of Sodom were guilty at, and Sodom was completely destroyed? Heller uses a verse in the book of Ezekiel to explain the difference in the two cases. This is what Ezekiel says about Sodom. Hinezeh avon Sodom achotech. This was the sin of Sodom, your sister, Gaon. It was arrogance. Now this is really interesting. In Ezekiel, it does not say that Sodom's sin was murder or rape or stealing. Their crime was not a physical action that they did. It was Sodom's attitude, arrogance. That was the crime. They believed that their evil behavior was justifiable and right and proper. That's what arrogant people do. Whatever they do, they justify and call it right, even when others might call it wrong. The Talmud further explains that the people of Sodom had no compassion. They only admired force, violence, and raw power. No wonder their arrogance was used to justify their crime. The people of Gibeah did terrible sins, but they didn't go as far as to normalize them. A society in which the inhabitants sin can endure, but a society that scorns compassion, that admires cruelty, that doesn't know what a sin is, has no right to exist and must be destroyed. That's what Heller says to explain the destruction of Sodom and the sparing of Gibeah. Heller's comparison explains a challenging comment by Rashi at the beginning of this week's Parsha. Rashi, remember, is the most important commentator on the Hebrew Bible. The Parsha that we read this morning begins, Shoftim v'shotrim titen lecha bechol sha'arecha. Make sure to appoint judges and officials for your tribes. And listen to what Rashi says. Kedai hu minui hadayanim haksherim lehachayot et Yisrael ulehoshivan al admatam. The appointment of honest judges is so important that it is of sufficient merit to keep Israel in life and to settle them in security in their land. You read that verse from Rashi and then you see what's going on in Israel, and it's haunting. The appointment of honest judges is of sufficient merit to keep Israel in life and settle them in security in their land. You want to be secure in your land? You really only have to do one thing. Just make sure you have proper and honest judges. But what if the people aren't listening to what the judges are saying? That's okay. There's never been a society where everybody follows the law of the land. That's why the Parsha says, Shoftim v'shotrim. You need judges and you need officials to handle situations where the law is not being followed. But you have to have law in the first place. When society no longer understands what is right and what is wrong, when that society tells you it's okay to be violent and cruel, when your judges are corrupt, that's the society that's in trouble. That's Sodom. So I want to say something about this that relates to us individually and something about it that relates to us as a society. Individually, this is the month of Elul. This is a month where we're supposed to be examining our deeds in the past year, working on ourselves, taking stock of our lives before Rosh Hashanah. If you know anything about Judaism, you know that this is a religion that has a lot of expectations, a lot of rules. It teaches that God expects a lot from us. The rules govern our interpersonal relationships, our relationships with God. We have lots of excuses to explain why we haven't always followed the rules. The things we did that we shouldn't have done, the things we said that we shouldn't have said. We learn from this that it's actually possible to be forgiven for everything. But we first have to admit that what we did was wrong. That admission, we call it vidui, is evidence that we may not always follow our moral compasses, but we affirm that they're working. I know what's right, I just may not always do it. So we have to think carefully about what it means to be good, to live good lives, and make sure to set standards for ourselves by which we can be honest judges of our own actions. It's important in Elul. But as a society, obviously Rabbi Heller's comment gives us reason to reflect as well. In Israel right now, as you know, the debate is, what kind of judiciary do we need? What will its role be? How do we choose those justices? I'm not going to stand here and give you the answers to those questions, but I will say that you cannot underestimate the crucial role that a strong and independent judiciary plays in ensuring the prosperity of the nation. You will hear many commentators rationalize that using political principles, but I want you all to hear that this can be rationalized using religious principles as well. Kedai hu minui hadayanim haksherim. Have proper judges. Lehachayot et Yisrael ulehoshivan al admatam. To make sure the people can live good lives and be settled in their land. We can pick on Israel, but the truth is, all over the world, moral relativism, the idea that judges are always biased, that there is no such thing as good or bad or right or wrong, is gaining ground. Moral relativism has a reputation for being compassionate, caring, and humane. That is nonsense. To promulgate moral relativism is to empower tyrants and tyranny. That's all it is. It's how Palestinians are forgiven for the terror they inflict on Israelis. It is how Vladimir Putin elicits sympathy for the war crimes he is committing against the Ukrainian people. Violations of human rights can only be justified when violence, cruelty, and power are normalized, when moral compasses don't exist, when these supplant compassion, dignity, and justice. This is perhaps the fundamental lesson of our Parsha this morning. Do not underestimate the crucial role that honest judges play to keep the people in life and settle them in security in their land. People are imperfect, but nations must stand on justice, or they will fall on tyranny. Let us use this lesson to center ourselves properly during this month of Elul, and let's make sure to be active and responsible citizens and Zionists who speak up for justice and moral clarity when others are confused. May our efforts ensure that the values of fairness, equality, and respect for human rights are upheld everywhere in the world. It is the only way to hand over a better world for future generations. Shabbat Shalom.